Hey, what's going on, guys? This is Dio from Red Diamond Mobile Auto Detailing, and welcome to the garage. So this is a completely different YouTube video than all my other YouTube videos. This is a mechanic video. So if you're interested in learning how to work on your own car mechanically, then this is a video for you. I've kind of figured that, kind of like me, I mean, I take care of my vehicle cosmetically, also mechanically, right? So I'm very much of the how do I do everything myself kind of thing. I figured I'm going to throw one of these videos up about a mechanic repair, and if you guys are interested in that, I'll produce more of them, more content. So this one's going to be about brakes. There is an issue with the hydraulics, right? And I already know what it is because I was already kind of getting ready for this. The fluid level for the braking system is low, and it's low because of the fact that the brake pads are really worn down. We're going to talk about all this, and I'm going to kind of show you some things I'm going to draw up on the whiteboard, kind of explain a little bit better about the hydraulics, how brakes work, stuff like that. But on my vehicle, I got to change the pads out, drums and brakes, or drums and discs, so that way you know how to do both. I'm also going to bleed the system since this car is it's pretty old. This is a 2011. It's never been done. That's basically what this video is about. So long intro. Let's go ahead and get into it. All right, so before we get into actually bleeding the brakes, changing out brake pads, things like that, here's a little diagram about how the braking system works. So out of my beautiful truck here that took me way more tries than I'll care to admit, this is kind of a rough sketch about how a braking system works. So with this truck in particular, these red circles right here with these red squares, these are going to be rotors and brake calipers. Most new cars are full disc brakes is what they're called. That's the rotor. That's what's called a disc. And the calipers are what actually stop the vehicle. So it's a round piece of metal and then a caliper, which has a piston in it that basically compresses when you press on the brake pedal, and it presses two brake pads on either side of the rotor. That's what causes friction, obviously. That's what slows the trucks down, or the vehicle, whatever kind of vehicle it is. In the back, we've got drums. You know, back in the old days, this is where it started. Spring drums. So this would be throughout the whole car. But as cars got faster, these are less powerful than rotors. Rotors are obviously way more powerful and way better efficient at slowing down vehicles. So these are kind of the older style, but these are still present in some newer cars that aren't as fast. They're cheaper to manufacture as far as I'm aware. So anyway, so on my car, I've got drums in the back, so we're going to definitely talk about that. And these act a little bit differently. They've got a drum hub. So it is a completely round piece of metal that basically is on the wheel hub. And then it has two brakes that are curved that actually expand outwards. And they push on the brake drum to slow the vehicle down. So these push out and these push in. And that's kind of how the braking system works. So in your engine, where you fill up your brake fluid, it's called a master cylinder, and that master cylinder is connected to a brake booster, which we're not going to really get into that, but just wanted to point out that the master cylinder is basically where the fluid is held, and that fluid goes into 4 different lines that go to your rear brakes, your front brakes, and then of course the emergency brake right here. That's actually your the lever inside of the interior of the vehicle, and that actually manually engages the brakes in the back. It is typically where those will engage. So there's a hard wire that's like a spring that you pull back, and it engages those two brakes. If you've ever seen inside of a transmission, when you put your car in park, there's only this real small cutout where this notch goes in, and it stops it's in charge of the entire car sitting still, right? So it's always a good habit to get into, whether you're on, especially if you're on a hill, but whether you're on a hill or not, I like to engage the emergency brake when I'm stopped and I'm getting out of my car, because like I said, you've got a 4,000-pound weapon that basically is only being stopped by this little bitty piece, this gear in the transmission. So anyways, what happens, when you press on this pedal, right, you're pushing with a plunger in this master cylinder, you're pushing the fluid out, which pushes the fluid on the brake drums and the calipers, and that pushing hydraulic action is what either with the calipers pushes the piston to engage the brakes in the front, or it pushes the master cylinder. There's a small master cylinder that actually pushes the two brake pads out to expand them in the drum hub. So, a little bit about how braking systems work. Now we'll get to changing out the pads, flushing out the system, and everything else. Just wanted to give you that little bit of information. All right, so before we get started with everything, a couple things that you want to do, and this is kind of common sense, but I'm going to go ahead and mention it. So get a car. You're going to need one. Get the car in an area where it's as flat as possible. That's why I'm doing it inside for lighting, because it's really dark outside right now. But my driveway is all kinds of uneven. So get it on an even surface, because to make this easier for me and for recording, I'm going to do one full side, and then I'm going to flip the car around and do the other side, because there's not as much room over the other side. But if I do this one side, it'll be great, because I'll show you how to do rotor, disc brakes, and drum brakes on one side. So once you get it to a flat, even spot that you think is safe, obviously put it in park, but don't engage the emergency brake. I know we just talked about that about parking, but we're going to take the drum brakes off, so we don't want that rear brake engaged. Once you get it to an area, lift the hood up. You're going to take the cap off of the master cylinder for the brake reservoir and kind of get a good idea. So one thing that I did fail to mention is that when your brakes are worn out, right? So if you have spongy brakes, you pull over and you look in your brake master cylinder and there's not enough fluid in there, that's an indicator, right? That's telling you that the fluid is all throughout the system, and that's primarily again an indicator that your brake pads are worn out. So what happens is when you have, and I'm going to exaggerate just for visual, when you have a brand new brake pad that's this thick, no, I'm just kidding, but again, just for demonstration, that's this thick, right? There doesn't need to be that much fluid for that piston, right, or that master cylinder to push those brakes to the disc brakes, right, or to the drum hub. It doesn't need that much fluid. As time goes and those brakes start to wear down, right, and they keep wearing out and wearing out, if it's a caliper, the piston needs to extend further to push those brake pads together. The same thing with the master cylinder. It has to push further to engage those brakes. So the more that your brake pads wear out, right, the more fluid the braking system needs. So there's going to be less fluid in the brake reservoir. So instead of filling up the brake reservoir, you should change your brakes, right? Because you only are going to have, unless you have a fluid leak, that same amount of fluid should run, forever until you need to change it again. We talked about flushing it about every 100,000 miles or so. So anyways, instead of topping it off, don't do that. Check your brakes. You probably need to change them. Okay. So anyways, we've got the cap off. There's hardly any brake fluid in here, which is why I said it's a perfect time to go ahead and flush the system out. So you can flush brake fluid without taking the tires off, depending on your vehicle, depending on how much room you have between the wheel well and the wheel. But I'm pulling mine off anyways, because again, I'm changing the brakes, right? So give you guys a better camera shot. So anyways, we got the car parked, safe spot. We got the hood up. Now we're going to go ahead and jack up the car safely, and then we're going to put floor jacks on it. So you can either do one side or you can do all four. Just, again, be very, very, very safe, man. It's a very heavy vehicle, all of them. It's not worth losing a leg or something like that. Just be very, very careful about what you're doing. And if you have any doubts about where to put floor jacks, or where to jack up the floor, things like that, check your owner's manual, and it'll tell you in the maintenance service area of your owner's manual, it'll tell you where your jack up points are, so you don't damage your vehicle when you're doing it. We're going to crack the lug nuts. We're going to jack up the car. We're going to put floor jacks under it, and then we're going to take the wheels off, and then we're going to talk about everything else, and I'll show you guys how to do all that. Okay, so realizing I was making a mistake, I'm not going to do just the side. I have to do the whole car. If you were just changing out your brakes, you could just do one side, whatever side needed to be done or whatever. But because we're flushing the brake fluid, you have to do the whole system. You have to do it in a specific order. So if you remember the diagram that we showed, right, depending on your vehicle, my master cylinder, I'll show you, is right here. Okay? So it is on the driver's side of the vehicle. And what that means to me is that I have to do the furthest brake from the master cylinder in descending order. Okay? So I have to go to the passenger rear, then to the driver rear. Okay? And this is leading the brakes, this is the sequence. Then I go to the passenger side, then I do the driver's side. Okay? So you're doing the furthest brake away from the master cylinder, and then you're going to the closest, right, in whatever order your vehicle is. And we're skipping ABS, all those things that can complicate that order. This is the general kind of sequence that you would do it in. So, when you're jacking up your vehicle, right, there's a little bit of back and forth. You kind of got to, when you're raising one side, you're lowering the other because you're putting stress on the suspension, right? So then you got to kind of jack up that side. But when you're doing that and you're correcting that side, this side may come down a little bit and the wheels may touch the ground. And you got to kind of raise it up again. So it's a little bit of back and forth play. This is great for, what we're doing, which is obviously flushing the brake system. This is also good for if you're rotating your tires at home. This is the exact same way that you would do it, because when you're rotating your tires, you need to pull all four off, and they're kind of organizing the way that you would do it if you had all-wheel drive, four-wheel drive, rear-wheel drive, that kind of thing. So once you get it done, right, just take your car, give it kind of an aggressive shake. You're not obviously trying to push it up the jack, but it would be much better if something were to happen now because your wheels are on, as opposed to if you're working on the car and a jack slips because it was teetering or something. If you kind of have weak jacks or something, if a jack slips, you don't have a tire off, that car's coming down, and hopefully, pray God, you're not in the way, but whenever it lands, you're going to have severe damage on your hands. So now you want something to go wrong because it's the safest time, right? So give that car a good shake. If you feel anything, if it doesn't feel right, fix it now. Once we pull these tires off, we're also going to use the tires just for backups. We're going to put them underneath the car. So again, if it lands on the wheels, it's a lot cheaper to replace a damaged wheel than something else, especially yourself. Right? So just everything you're doing, this is safety, right? This is where things go wrong. This is where people lose legs, right? So just take your time, and if you're not comfortable with it, don't do it. But I'm just giving you some tips. Don't just take me. There's plenty of other YouTubers out there to show you exactly what I'm showing you. Do your research until you're comfortable. It's exactly what I did. It's what I'm encouraging you to do. Anyways, so sorry, I know I'm waterboarding all this stuff, but it's important to know. So we went around, we cracked all the lug nuts, right? So obviously the wheels are up out of the air, right? If you go to try to crack lug nuts now, the wheel's just going to spin, right? So we cracked all of our lug nuts, our lugs are free. We raised the car, we put them on jacks. I've got 4 jacks all around the car, so the car is secure. Now we're going to go ahead, loosen the lug nuts the rest of the way, pull the tires off, and then we'll show you kind of where to replace the tires, and then that way we're on to the next step. All right, so the wheels are off. And I realized why I ran out of brake fluid. And it's not because of what I thought, the brakes being really low. It's because a master cylinder failed. So, let me show you what I'm talking about here. Okay, so we are on the rear driver's side, right? So this is the drum brake, right? So this hub, right? This round hub, see the inside of that? Okay, the inside of that hub, these are the brake pads. These brake pads expand and press against the hub. This is the master cylinder right here. And this has 2 pins that when you press on the brakes, they push out. And they push these pads into the drum hub. Well, the gasket right here, these rubber grommets, that's what basically houses the brake fluid. So this black part, that's your brake line. And that goes all the way up to the master cylinder. We talked about that. when this rubber fails, and it can fail for a number of reasons, it will just basically leak brake fluid everywhere. And so it is all over my wheel, right? That's a good sign right there. So all my brake fluid pretty much dumped out of the entire system. That's why I didn't have any brakes. So, a couple of things when this happens. One, be very clean, because brake fluid is extremely corrosive. It will rust metal. It will eat through paint. So if you get any of it on your auto paint, your car's paint, clean it off. It'll eat right through it. Definitely want to wear clothes that you don't care about. These are I'm working on my car. Shoes, pants, shirt, everything. Wear gloves, protect your skin, things like that. But anyways, this kind of changes things. So this stalls my whole project. Right now it's like 1 o'clock in the morning. I can't flush the brake system because now we have a leak, obviously, in one spot, right? So that kind of stops everything. You don't want to put new pads on yet because you want to bleed the brake system as is. You want to start there first and then put on your new brake pads. So I'm in this spot where I've got to wait till tomorrow and go to the auto parts store. The first thing I'm going to do though is clean my wheel and clean everywhere where there's brake fluid. So if you see that you have a brake fluid leak, clean the whole area. So I'm going to clean my wheel, my tire, things like that. So unfortunately tonight I can't do anything else. I got to go get a master cylinder tomorrow. So I'm signing off for now. So we'll start back in the morning. Ugh. The thing irritates me is that's the third time I've had to replace a rear master cylinder. So frustrating. All right. And through the magic of editing, I will see you tomorrow morning. All right, guys, what's going on? It's tomorrow morning. So I've got my parts, and doing the drum brakes, obviously, I need to disassemble all the springs and stuff like that before I replace the master cylinder. So I figured I'd go ahead and walk you guys through that and show you how that process is done. You can see that these pads they've got a little bit to them left, but I'm going to go ahead and replace them anyways. They're pretty worn out. They definitely need to be changed. So as far as your drum brakes and what they look like, what I can suggest to you is either take a video of everything that you're disassembling, or take pictures beforehand. Every time you remove one thing, take a picture. You somehow document the process, where everything goes and in what order. If not, download some sort of diagram. But the first thing that I'm gonna do is remove these springs that basically hold the brake pads. So after a little bit of fighting, you've got this little pin, right? It's got that flat part and that goes on the backing plate. And then you've got that spring, and then it's got this little cap that the pin goes through, right? And then you rotate it, and then the pin doesn't come out. So once you put it on, you rotate it, the pin doesn't, pull off, right? Rotate it 90 degrees, comes off. If you rotate it 90, stays on. That's what keeps that spring in place. So again, when you're taking parts off, just keep everything together, keep everything organized. I cleaned all this with brake cleaner before I did all this, so that definitely helps too. So we've got those two springs out. Next thing I'm going to do is there's a very small spring under here that holds the two brakes together in the bottom. I'm going to go ahead and remove this just like that. And then once you do that, this basically acts like a clamshell, right? And you can actually just kind of pull it apart from there. Alright. Now I get the spring taken off. And it basically all falls apart. So we got the two brake pads, right? Just like that. This is an adjustment rod for your brakes, right? This is a locking mechanism for your emergency brake, and then this is connected to the brake pad, right? This plate right here, which is connected to the spring, right there, that activates your emergency brake. So there's a little clip right here at the bottom that all you do is just kind of push that off. Depending on who installed the brakes, they may have kind of pushed this together, right? This like horseshoe C-clamp. They may have kind of pinched it together to close it. So you might need to actually get like a screwdriver between there, wedge it in there, and open it up a little bit. So once you do that, then the emergency brake lever comes right off. So there you go. You get your two very old, worn out brake pads right there. Okay. So again, when you're doing this, now everything's disassembled. I'm gonna clean this up again, really good. This is still got a lot of brake fluid on it, and get this as cleaned up as I possibly can. And then we'll come back. I'll install the new brake pads. I'll talk to you about contact points and lubricating those contact points. So like I said, next thing I'm gonna do off camera is I'm gonna clean this up and then replace this brake master cylinder. We don't need to put that in the video. And then we will, like I said, install the new brake pads. So give me a little bit, I'll be back. Okay, so one of the reasons that I like to do my own brakes is because I'm gonna go the extra mile that I don't think most mechanics would, because I want to take care of my vehicle. I want things a certain way. So obviously the new master cylinder is now installed. I will tell you that if you do anything with brake lines, make sure that you're using some sort of flared wrench. So open-end wrench, something that's flared that is specific for brake lines, right? So not like a normal box end, because if you strip it, you're going to be in serious trouble. So definitely invest in something like that. They're not that expensive, but well worth the peace of mind. So anyways, new master cylinder's in, and here's one of the things that I like to do when I'm installing new brakes. So with the brake pads, right, so this is the new one, right, so it goes like that. Along the back of the brake pads, there are 3 separate contact points that the brake pad comes into. And this is one of them, this is the other one, and down here's the third one, right? So same thing at the other side. 1, 2, 3, right? So 3 areas that the brake pad rubs against, right? And so if you don't like squeaky brakes, again, go on that little bit of extra mile. I've got some 1000 grit sandpaper. I'll come in here and clean that contact point up. If I can get the camera shot right. All right, so get that good and smooth, and then you take some copper anti-seize, and you don't need to do a lot. But just take that brush and just throw a little bit on there, just like that. Now, when you're using this anti-seize, obviously, common sense. You definitely don't want to get any of it on the brake pad, right? So you want to make sure that your hands are clean, things like that, and just make sure you don't make a mess with that. But anyways, you sand those 3 points down before you put the brake pads on, and it definitely eliminates the possibility of squeaking. So I'm going to do that next, and then we're going to do with assembly. Okay, so we got our 6 contact points lubricated, right? So now we're going to start the reassembly process. So there you go. So the new brakes are in. Remember to check if there's any anti-seize, that may have rubbed off on it. But new master cylinder. All these parts you can buy a kit and replace them. It's fairly new, so I kept them. But when those springs start to go bad and they start to wear out, it's best to replace them. So, anyways, all right. So we got the brakes changed out, and so now let's go ahead and we'll do, since we got the brake master cylinder on here now we can actually start bleeding the system before we change the brakes out. So we're going to start that now. Okay, so bleeding your brakes is a very simple procedure. There's a couple things that you just need to be aware of that'll make your job a lot easier. So really, the only tool that you need is a boxed-in wrench, depending on the size of your bleeder valve, and then you can take a bottle and a tube. It's pretty simple. Okay, so bleeding your brakes is a very simple procedure. There's a couple things that you need to keep in mind. That's definitely not going to have you repeat the process if you do it incorrectly. But as far as the tool that you'll need, get a water bottle, some kind of plastic container that's got a nice sealed lid on it, and clean it out real good. You want to make sure that you don't have any kind of water in it or any kind of liquid that isn't brake fluid, right? And we're going to drill a hole in the cap, and we're going to put a rubber line through it. So the one that I have is, this goes to like a breathing treatment machine, but you can use fuel line. You basically just want something that the end of the hose fits real firmly on the bleeder valve. And that's going to do a couple things. One, it's going to keep any kind of moisture or contaminants or air, most importantly, out of the system when you're bleeding it, but it's also going to not leak fluid, right? So that's important. So I know what size this hose is, so I'm going to go ahead and screw a hole into the cap to fit this line through, and I'll show you that in a second. So I'm going to go right in the center of the cap. Just like that. Kind of clean the edges up a little bit, and then I'll need to go a little bit bigger to fit this hose in. Okay, so I've got the size screwed out, or drilled out, for the size of the hose, but it's a good idea to go ahead in one of the corners, just go ahead and do a little hole there, just for pressure. Take brake fluid, and you're going to want to fill this bottle up about 1/3 of the way. So that way when you're bleeding the brakes, if any fluid gets pulled back through the line, it's not air, it's brake fluid. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stick this tube down at the very bottom of the container and figure out kind of where I want it. And then you can take like a zip tie, or something like that. I don't have any small ones, so I'm just going to take some tape. Kind of tape that up there like that, so I know that the hose now won't come out of the bottle. Tighten that real tight. There you go. So now you just made your very own bleeder tool. So now let's go over and take care of the brakes. So we've talked about the order that we're going to bleed the brakes, and of course we are at the passenger rear. That's where we're going to start. So depending on your bleeder valve, so here's the cap, right? This little rubber cap, and again that just keeps things out of the bleeder valve, the nipple. So I want to make sure that you don't lose that. But here, right here, the little brass bleeder valve, that's where we're going to go. So I'm going to stick the box end wrench, I'm going to stick that on first, and then I'm going to take this hose and I'm going to stick this on. There you go. Now it's going to create a really, really nice seal. Now, depending on the age of your vehicle, you want to make sure that when you crack these bleeder valves that you're very careful. If it's really rusted, you want to be careful and crack it, right? And then put like a container underneath. You want to go ahead and remove that bleeder valve the whole way, right? And replace it. It's real cheap to do, but these on all mine are not rusted. But this basically connects to the master cylinder, the one that we replaced. This bleeder valve connects right to it. So you want to take this line and kind of hang it up just a little bit, right? And what that's going to do, it's going to allow the fluid to be pushed up through it, but any air is going to get stuck at the top of the line and not be back in the system. So now what we're going to do is we're going to gently crack it about a quarter of a way, right? And then go press on the brake about 10 times, and then you want to check your master cylinder. You want to make sure that you don't run all the fluid in the master cylinder out. What happens is if you run the master cylinder dry, depending on where you are in the process, you have to start all over again because now you have air into the system, right? So every 10 pumps, you want to check that master cylinder. Now, basically, all you want to do is run the fluid out so you don't have any air and you don't have any dirty fluid. You remember the fluid that we poured into the bottle, right? You see how crystal, not crystal clear, but you see how clear that is? Look at this, that's coming out just because of it being gravity bled right now. Look how dirty that fluid is. Okay, so that's contaminants, that's, that's just nasty. I'm sure it's got water, in the lines. Not good. So anyways, I'm gonna go press on the brake and watch all this really nasty, disgusting fluid come out. Okay, so we did 10 pumps. It's still really dark. We checked the master cylinder, still got plenty of fluid left. So we're gonna keep going. This by far is not over yet. So we're gonna do 10 more pumps and just repeat, check on everything. So now that fluid is clean. So what we're gonna do now is we're gonna come over here and we're gonna tighten that bleeder valve. And you don't wanna over tighten it, just enough just to keep it kind of snug, right? And then when you pull this tube off, lift it up so that the fluid drains down into the bottle. Okay, so we know what our fluid should look like, right? You see all that on the top. You see how it's separated from the brake fluid? That's because there's water in there, right? Water and brake fluid don't mix. So that's contaminants, dirt, and like I said, most dangerously, water, because water can be compressed a lot easier than fluid, because once water evaporates, you're left with air. So, not a good thing. Not a good thing that these aren't mixing. It's a good thing that we're doing this. So, now that we've got this one done, kind of clean up our area a little bit. And then don't forget that little rubber cap. Keep that that bleeder valve protected. So now we're going to do it to the other drum because that's the furthest one away, and then we're going to go up to the front. Okay, just wanted to do this. So I'm on the driver's side rear, and because I bled the passenger side rear first, that's obviously the furthest line away. This line is going to take a lot less time to clean because there's a split in the back of the car. So the majority of that, the contaminated fluid, we took care of. The difference in this line is that we're not dealing with contaminants. It's pretty clean, actually. We're dealing with air bubbles. And the reason why we're dealing with air bubbles is because our master cylinder failed. And what happens is when your master cylinder fails, when you press on the brake, it's going to suck in air, right? So in this one, we're not so much dealing with, when is the contaminated fluid out of it. Of course, there was plenty of contaminated fluid, but it was a lot faster to get it out. Now we got to make sure that there's no air. You see that big gap right there? That's air. We need to get that out of there. So keep doing it until you don't see any air. Okay, so here's how we're at so far with the back. Man, that is just nasty. So there's actually so much water and contaminants that is actually becoming the majority. But anyways, we're going to keep going. So I'm going to set up here. We're going to start talking about disc brakes. Okay, so disc brakes are bled the exact same way than the drums are, right? So the procedure is not any different. The one thing I did want to mention is the reason why I'm bleeding the brakes first instead of replacing the brake pads and then bleeding is because calipers are a little bit different than drums. So with the drum brakes, I changed out the brake pads. That doesn't affect the master cylinder, right? The master cylinder is what pushes the two brake pads apart. So we bled out one master cylinder on the passenger rear. That was what took the longest. And then, of course, the driver rear that had a bunch of air in it because it failed, right? So, but again, putting on new pads doesn't affect the master cylinder. Now, when you put on new pads on your calipers, it does affect the brake fluid levels because you need to push the piston back, right, to give room for that thicker brake pad, the new brake pad, right? So I don't want to push the piston back in the caliper and force all that bad fluid back up through the lines, right? I want to replace the bad fluid because it's already close. It's already right here. And then put in new fluid. It doesn't matter. It's just the way that I do it. Either way, just make sure that when you're bleeding out your brakes, that you don't have your reservoir completely filled, and then you push that piston back in the caliper, and you push all that fluid out of your reservoir all over your engine. So before you push the piston back in the caliper, you want the reservoir to be kind of low, not to where there's air that gets in the system, but you want it to be low enough to where you have some room to push fluid back in through the system to push that piston back to put in those new brake pads. So I've got the reservoir kind of filled, so we're going to go ahead and we're going to bleed these brakes, and that way we can make room in the master cylinder so when we push that piston back that we're not pushing brake fluid out of the master cylinder, right? So, like I said, same procedure. I'm on the passenger side. So we're going to go ahead and bleed this brake, and then we'll do the driver front side, and then we will come back to the passenger, and we will change out the brake pads, and then do it on the driver's side, and then we're done. Okay, so when I show you how to change disc brakes out, you're going to realize why the next vehicle that I ever purchase, I'm never buying disc brakes or drum brakes again. So when I show you how easy this is, you're going to want a vehicle that has all four disc brakes. So let me show you. In the back here is completely dark. So in the back here, a lot going on. But there's only 4 bolts to your entire caliper, right? So there is this bolt here, and this bolt down here matches this one. Okay, you would only take these off if you wanted to take the entire assembly apart. So if you were replacing a rotor, or you were replacing like a CV axle, something like that, this basically, these two 19mm bolts will completely take the whole caliper assembly off the knuckle, right? We don't need to do that. All we need to do is really take this one off, right? So this is actually what is connected to the caliper, which moves back and forth, right? That's what actually creates the braking. So this is what we're going to take off to get to the brake pads. So there's one here, and let me see if I can angle this down. This is really kind of a bad angle. And then there's one here, which, right there, right? So we'll start there, and we'll remove those 2 bolts. On my car, it is a 14mm. Of course, it's going to be different on everybody's car. Let me see here. Yeah, this one, right? Okay. So I'll crack these. One at the top, one at the bottom. Now these 2 bolts are different, right? So these are called your gallipers, your caliper guiding rods, guiding pins. They've got different names, but basically they're your guiding pins. So they look a little bit different, so just remember which one's on top, which one's on bottom. And we'll talk about maintenance on this and all that stuff here in a little bit. Okay, so the bolt only has threads for this part, right? And then the rest of it, there's no threads. So we're going to take the bottom one out first. So the bottom one has this little black tip, so just remember that, all right? I'm going to set that to the side. Okay, and then holding this part, right? So the housing, right, the actual bracket, the mounting bracket, that's not going to go anywhere, right? But this right here, right, the actual rounded part that actually houses the brake pads, that will fall down. Nothing's holding it up right now. So you're going to grab it, and then you're just going to kind of pull it off the brake pads. Now be careful because this is actually connected to the brake line. See, this is your breaker line right here. So you don't want to put any stress on that. So what you want to do is I hang it up here on my shocks, just like that. Get the light in here. Right? So now my brake line is free to hang, right? And it's not going anywhere. Now, depending on your vehicle, of course, it's going to be a little bit different. Sorry for the microphone noise. So just be smart. You basically, like I said, just do not want the brake line to have any kind of stress. You don't want to hang it straight down. You know, you just don't want to put any unnecessary pressure on that brake line. So do something to hang it up. Put a 5-gallon bucket under here and put the caliper on top, you know, however your situation is. So now, like I said, this is the mounting bracket for the caliper. We're going to leave that on. There's no point in taking that off. All you need to do, remember how difficult it was to do the drum brakes? That's it. Boom. Grabbing them off. No big deal, right? So, the one thing that you do want to look at is for uneven wear in your brake pads. So look at your brake pads and see if one side is more worn out than the other one, or maybe the top portion of the brake pad is worn out but the bottom is not. That could indicate a caliper failure, right? So over time, if debris gets in the caliper piston, if it gets into the rubber seal and contaminants get in there, it can actually damage the caliper. And there's other reasons why a caliper would seize or work improficiently, but worn out brake pads will tell the story, right? Mine look good, everything's good there. So I'm going to set that to the side. So now we've got our new ones, of course. But before we get to that, let's talk about the actual brake pads themselves. So in the box, I've got the brake pads. They're wrapped up there. We'll set this to the side. And you've got your shims, right? So we're going to replace these. So the old ones, they're right here, top and bottom. It takes a little bit of kind of convincing, but there you go. We're going to pop these out. This is a movable part. So the top of the brake pad actually slides back and forth on this. So it's good to go ahead and get the old ones out and replace them. So very simply, just pop them right back in place. There's two. Now, the kit does come with clips that you can clip onto the brake pads. And what they do is they're basically wear indicators. So when your brake pads start to get real low, these little clips scrape on the rotors and make a very unpleasant sound. And that's basically like, okay, I need to change my brakes, right? You still have plenty of brake power left. It just makes that unpleasant sound, so you think that you need to change out your brake pads for safety. Now, I check my brakes so often, you know, things like that. Every time I detail, you know, the wheel wells and stuff like that, like I'm looking at my suspension, I'm looking for leaks, I'm looking at the brakes and stuff like that. So I don't put those on, but you can if you'd like. So one thing I do want to say about brakes is that it's very difficult to mess it up. So obviously you get a set of 4 of these, so you can do both in the front, right? there's no wrong way to put this on. Like if you try to put this on backwards, like it's not going to happen. There's very few mistakes that you can make except one, and I'll tell you guys about that. But really, this should not be intimidating. It's so easy to do, and it saves you guys money. And then, like I said, the thing that mechanics don't do that I do, I'll take a little bit of copper anti-seize and put it right there on that little nub, right? And then right here on this little nub. Now again, same thing with the drum brakes. You want to make sure that no anti-seize gets on the actual brake pad itself. So just be very careful. The reason why I'm putting anti-seize on there is because this brake is a moving part. So it's going to go back and forth on that shim, and I don't want any kind of friction to create, an unpleasant noise like a scraping or squealing or whatever. So you do just a little bit of this, just enough, and it'll last you the entire lifetime of the brake pad. So you'll never have to do this again. So even if you buy cheap brakes, you can do certain things to kind of prevent that unpleasant sound, of squealing. So the one thing that makes calipers wear out quick is when you go to the mechanics, they're just going to shove this piston back into the caliper, right? We've talked about this piston, right? So when I shove this back, right, I'm going to be pushing brake fluid through the system, right, backwards, okay? So before you put this piston and you shove it through, take a towel that's got a little bit of brake clean on it and clean the very edge of this piston that's exposed. That way, when you do shove this piston back into the caliper housing, you're not shoving contaminants back into the rubber housing, right? Because what happens is when those contaminants, when they get inside of the rubber and they rub back and forth when you're braking, that's what causes brake fluid leaks, and that's what ultimately can lead to a caliper failure. So be clean with this part. Do it every time you change your brakes, and your brakes will thank you. Okay, so once we've cleaned the caliper, take the old brake pad and put it on there, and then I've got this piston recess tool. Okay, so take the old brake pad, put it against the piston, take this tool, and this will evenly press back that piston. I've seen people use, wrenches and vice grips and stuff like that. You can. I just like to do it this way because I know it's the proper way. It doesn't risk the piston going in cockeyed, because that's where you're going to get uneven brake pad wear. Plus it gets it all the way in there flush. So there we go. Clean the piston. Remember, when you do this, when you do both of these, make sure that you have enough room in your brake reservoir, that you don't have it filled with fluid. You're going to be really upset at yourself if that happens. So, do another quick wipe. So now, take a paper towel and clean off these guide pins real good, right? They've got grease and brake dust and all kinds of stuff all over them. So, I want to get them nice and cleaned. And check them. If you see any uneven wear, flat spots, anything like that, it's time to replace your pins. I've had this car for 230,000 miles. That's never happened to me, but it does happen, sometimes. So just check. Now, there are supposed to be grooves. Like you see, let me see, that flat groove right there. Okay, that's machined in. That's supposed to be like that. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about some sort of uneven wearing that the pin has happened inside of the caliper, right? So, once you have that done, I'm going to do the top one first. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to take our top guide pin. Remember, this one doesn't have the black tip. It's for the top. and we're going to take some silicone. And we're going to brush it on this guide pin. So the reason why we use silicone instead of anything else is it doesn't absorb water, right? So take our caliper, break it down, kind of let it settle. And then take our guide pin and then kind of get it in there just so it can set. And then we're going to do that to the bottom one. The bottom one in. Okay. And then tighten it back up. Now with this, because this is a moving part, there's only going to be so much that you can tighten this. It's going to bottom out in the mounting bracket. So you don't really need to crank on this too much. Right? Once you feel it snug, give it just a little bit more, and then you're good. Okay, so bottomed out right here. There you go. That's all you need. Okay, so bottomed out right there. That's it. All right, guys, you did it. That's it. That's all it takes, man. So we have done it ourselves. We bled, changed our brakes. Took me a couple hours. But I changed out a brake a master cylinder, changed out the brakes, and then we bled the system. Now you would have paid a mechanic, hundreds of dollars to do this, right? Whereas it only took me $100 worth of parts, and then it took me maybe 2-3 hours to do. It took me a lot longer because of doing a video. So you could do this in less time than that, especially once you get the hang of it. But the doing the NICs and checking everything and checking your suspension and going over everything, make sure everything's lubricated properly and cleaned properly and stuff like that. I just like doing that myself. That's just me. So if you clean your own car, I'm assuming that you do this kind of stuff on your own. So if you guys are interested in more videos like this, definitely let me know. I enjoy working on my own car. I like it. I'm a car guy. So this is my thing. So I figured why not put this up on the YouTube channel, see if anybody needs this. There's plenty of how-to videos on how to change your brakes, but, throw my own little thing on there. So, like I said, let me know down in the comments if this is something that you enjoyed. If you have any questions about anything, reach me at my email, dogreen@ymail.com. This is a lot of fun to do, so I appreciate it, guys. Okay, so I was done with the video, and I was like, all right, bye, guys. Yeah, okay, so I said earlier, there's only one thing that you can do to mess up brakes, right? It's a pretty big deal. I wanted to let you know about that. And then I just completely left you. So anyways, here's that one thing. When you change your brake set on your car, right, and you put the wheels back on and all that stuff, do not just throw it in reverse or drive and decide to take off. The brake system's not pressurized, right? So before you do anything, right, turn the car over, right, and give that brake pedal a dozen pumps. Make sure you'll feel it. Like the first couple pumps will be real spongy and real soft, and then it'll harden up out of nowhere. And that is when the brake system's pressurized, right? So yeah, don't just kick it over. That's the only thing you need to be aware of when you're changing out brakes is that before you just take off. Because if you don't pressurize the system and you throw it in reverse, you're going, and there ain't no stopping until you panic and hit the pedal a bunch of times until that system pressurizes. Ask me how I know. So anyways, that was the last thing I wanted to let you all know about. Be safe out there. Appreciate it, guys. Take it easy.